Yeah, we're just gonna get right into this one, guys. My name is Nova, this is Film Express, and today we're gonna be talking about the long-awaited, much-anticipated new Christopher Nolan film, The Odyssey. Let's dive right in. So Christopher Nolan is back with a new movie. It's crazy to say, it feels like an event every time he drops. And now he's fresh off an Oscar win for his latest film, Oppenheimer, where he won Best Picture and Best Director. There was a lot of pressure hinging on his next project, and for him to announce that he's taking on the monumental feat of adapting the greatest story ever made, I was more than excited. I was absolutely so hyped. You know, people who know me know that I'm not the biggest Christopher Nolan fan, but the fact that he was adapting this, I had a lot of faith in him. There's almost no way he could screw this up, in my opinion. This was like a cheat code to success. I was actually convinced that Nolan was about to drop the greatest film he's ever made, and one of the greatest films of all time. As more and more images and trailers started to be released for the film, let's just say I started to get a little bit more concerned. The casting aside, you know, the images didn't really sell me as much. I was holding on to a little bit of faith. I was hoping that Christopher Nolan could adapt this story into something that would be magnificent, and I was really excited to catch it. Even on opening night, I went to go see it in IMAX. I unfortunately didn't get a chance to see it in 70mm because it's been sold out. Everyone who knows me can say that I'm a critical person. I'm very harsh on movies, but I go into things with an open mind. Even if I've been critical of Nolan over the years, I still really liked Oppenheimer, for example, but some of his other films before that, I was not the biggest fan. I was still hoping and excited that one of the most beloved filmmakers was adapting a story like this. I went in with an open mind. I wanted to give him a chance to win me over. Unfortunately, I'm so sad to report that by my books, by my standards, The Odyssey was not a great film. It felt like a very anticlimactic piece of screenwriting and filmmaking that just let me down. It struck me as a void of creativity from somebody I always thought was pretty ambitious in that sense. I always felt like Christopher Nolan has some great concepts and ideas, but he approaches them in a very cold and inhumane way. I don't believe he has a really good grasp of like human emotions, and the way he writes women, I mean, we could talk about that for hours and hours and hours about how flawed it is. There's these flaws in his writing and his approach to filmmaking that I've noticed over the years, and they're kind of really amplified here in The Odyssey. In my opinion, The Odyssey is bottom tier Nolan. I would put it in the bottom 3 of Nolan's films. It's also fighting very hard to take that top spot to be the worst thing that Christopher Nolan has ever written. Beyond the insufferable amount of exposition and mansplaining, this was some of the worst dialogue I believe I've heard in a Christopher Nolan movie. Beyond the modern colloquialisms and the weird character dialogue, the film is very, very poorly structured. It's paced horrendously, and it also features a very, very odd interpretation of the text that Nolan has taken and kind of ran with on a new thematic angle for the character and for the story that I don't feel particularly landed. I felt like it was quite misguided, and it made for quite an uninteresting take on the material, in my opinion. Every single bit of dialogue here felt like wasted breaths. It all felt like things that Christopher Nolan is telling you instead of showing you, and this has been something he's been guilty of in almost all of his scripts, especially in the last 15 years or so. Everything is told and then it's repeated, and then later on it's repeated in case you missed it, and in case you were like scrolling on your phone or dozing off or something, Christopher Nolan makes sure to repeat it once more because it really feels like he does not trust his audience. He wants to drill things home and he wants to repeat them so that it sticks with you. In my opinion, trusting the audience is a skill, and it's something that comes with maturity in filmmaking. It doesn't come across as confident to me, which is crazy because he feels like one of the filmmakers who should be the most confident, but the way he writes scripts, in my opinion, doesn't give across that confidence in the audience. There were so many lines of dialogue here that kind of ruined my immersion. After a while, after about 20-30 minutes, once you kind of accept that, you can kind of move along and just kind of go with the flow. But it wasn't long before the other cracks in the script kind of show. I found the Odyssey structure to be so repetitive and so bland. I never felt a single thrill from watching any of these scenes play out. Now, of course, this is a familiar story. We've seen this referenced and adapted a bunch of times in so many different things, so there's no secret there. I'm familiar with what's going to happen, and that's not Nolan's fault or the fault of the project whatsoever. But you'd also hope and you'd also think that what people consider to be one of the greatest filmmakers living and working in the industry right now, you would think that he would take the story and do something more interesting with it rather than adding a new thematic angle, a new thematic branch, I would say. And I commend him for trying to add some more nuance to the Odyssey and Odysseus as a character. There's nothing wrong with his approach. I just don't feel like it particularly landed. Thematically, the Odyssey becomes about the traumas of war, it becomes about survivor's guilt, it becomes about the importance of memories. It never really felt like Nolan was exploring these themes in an interesting or unique way. Nolan's version of Odysseus is a man who has a bunch of regrets about his time in the war and about his actions across his journey. You know, personally, I struggle to really care about Odysseus feeling all this guilt about his journey, about the war, about his actions, because he kept making selfish decisions. He kept spilling his milk and then crying over it too. In my opinion, it just didn't land for me. He kept making the wrong choices without any of the motivation to really land them. The text version of Odysseus is this cunning and intelligent man who uses deceit to get what he wants, and he wants the glory, and he wants stories to be told about him. He wants the legend and the myth to be about him and his journey. And Nolan's version is honestly kind of clumsy and stupid and emotional, and he has unclear motivations and just never really made sense for me. And the guilt-ridden version of this person who realizes he might be the fall of civilization kind of just felt so contrived and so forced, but it also felt so familiar because it also kind of parallels the story of Oppenheimer, a story that Christopher Nolan just explored a few years ago and had massive success with. Because they're so similar and because they were so close to each other in terms of release, I didn't feel like Nolan was exploring anything too new or too interesting to me. I feel like he explored this much better in Oppenheimer. There was much more severe consequences in Oppenheimer. The consequences here in The Odyssey, they felt a lot more contrived and a lot more minuscule. If I agree with the themes or not, that's beside the point. I gave Christopher Nolan the benefit of the doubt. I kept watching, I kept seeing where the story would go, and I just kind of kept getting disappointed with the themes. Feels like Nolan places so much importance on the wrong aspects of the story, in my opinion, and the wrong perspectives required for some of these moments to land. There's a lot of this survivor's guilt about the men who were lost, the men that they didn't get a chance to bury. It means nothing without the vanity that stems from a quest and a desire for glory that would be more in line with Homer's rendition of Odysseus than Christopher Nolan's. When it comes to like the war crimes and the PTSD angle, it all leads up to this reveal with Athena's character. I kind of saw that coming from a mile away. It didn't really land emotionally, and the film is hinging so much on this moment. It also just struck me as one of those like cliche victims that haunts the main character type of tropes. It didn't really strike me as anything original. It's a cool concept. I can appreciate it. It just didn't land. It didn't really do too much, and it kind of opens up way too many problems about what he's projecting onto her and what she's telling him, and the problems that it creates definitely outweigh the benefits of how unique of a concept that is. The film has this annoying reliance on this concept of Zeus's law throughout the runtime. We're constantly told of its importance and the limitations of Zeus's law and breaking Zeus's law, but we're never really shown the extent of Zeus's law, like the extent of the harmony that following Zeus's law can bring, or the consequences of breaking the law itself. It's just this kind of idea that we're told to run with. This idea of, welcoming guests into your home or being kind to beggars and things like that, but there's no real weight to it. It kind of feels like a MacGuffin of sorts, and it's kind of a lame one. Odysseus doesn't even really break Zeus's law with the Trojan horse as much as he does kind of misunderstand it. And his whole saga of guilt kind of feels motivated by this misunderstanding. It's very misguided. By having this idea of Zeus's law hanging over him and this idea of these people from the sea that are supposedly this impending threat, this twist is revealed that basically they are the people from the sea. And it's supposed to be this like hard-hitting moment, but you see this throughout the film. There's a couple times where they go to certain islands and they basically are shown pillaging people, taking their resources, taking their food. People are afraid of them. They're causing ruckus everywhere they go. You are very, very clearly aware that these are the people from the sea. In my opinion, it was very, very obvious. It was very, very telegraphed from the start. And because it was so telegraphed, that emotional climax never really landed for me. I don't really feel like Nolan's that good at emotional climaxes in general. This is just another example of that. Now, Nolan seems to believe that the destruction of society begins with the individual. Very cool concept, sure, but I can't really give my investment to that when, again, like I said, it's very similar to Oppenheimer. He didn't manage to elevate the theme more than Oppenheimer's. He didn't manage to do anything in terms of the spectacle better than Oppenheimer, so it's just like he kind of made a very similar project but worse. Now, as usual in the Christopher Nolan script, everything is told. All character relationships are told via dialogue. What you should know and perceive about a character is told to you rather than shown. Even something as simple as like Agamemnon, Christopher Nolan is telling you that Agamemnon is this badass. He films Agamemnon in a way where he's like aura farming and he's standing around being menacing and tall. The camera and the music cues want you to believe that this character is a badass, yet he does nothing in the film to show you that he's a badass. This is very similar to like Bane in The Dark Knight. Christopher Nolan does this time and time again where he tells you someone is strong and menacing, but they never never show it. Regardless, it's just very, very sad that Christopher Nolan relies on this technique of telling you things rather than showing you. I would love to have seen Agamemnon in battle, but they never really show you. In terms of narrative spectacle, I feel like the film trudges along from scene to scene without like rhyme or reason, without any purpose. We go from island to island, from flashback to flashback. It jumps around time in a kind of like a quasi non-linear structure, and you never really get the sense that you've been anywhere long enough for a single scene or a single moment to really stand out for you to be memorable. It's so rushed, in my opinion. Nolan's insistence on making this about memory results in all these flashbacks that kind of break the pacing and break the structure up a bunch throughout the film. We keep cutting back and forth between like Telemachus and Odysseus, which also kind of ruins any build-up in Telemachus's quest to find answers about his father. Odysseus' time with Calypso is basically shown very, very early on. I believe that would have hit so much harder if it came maybe an hour or two into the film. Because Nolan's kind of jumping back and forth through all these scenes without any rhyme or reason, it kind of gives you all this information without any of these stakes. There's very little tension, in my opinion. Besides maybe the Cyclops scene, and even then very little, there was very, very little tension throughout the film because you kind of just know what's going to happen, and Christopher Nolan doesn't play with suspense in an interesting way, the way somebody like Hitchcock or Paul Thomas Anderson are known to do. I really, really do believe that this film was so rushed, especially with a film that talks about the passage of time and memories over time. We're rushing through important bits of spectacle and character moments for Odysseus or any other characters just so Nolan can kind of whiplash us into another scene, into another set piece. It's almost a 3-hour film, and Nolan's rushing through all these set pieces. I do not believe another 20 or 30 minutes would have killed this movie. I actually believe it would have done the film so much justice, just so Nolan could kind of take his time. An Odyssey should feel like an Odyssey. It should not feel like we're zipping through a highlight reel of action scenes. That's how it felt to me at times. Another big flaw, and I mentioned this before, is the way Christopher Nolan writes women. If you break this down, you can point back to almost any character except maybe one or two in all of Christopher Nolan's filmographies. All the female characters in Christopher Nolan's filmographies spend their time whining or manipulating the men, being objects of desire, being objects of longing, archetypes meant to appeal to men's emotions, make the man's journey more difficult. Nolan never really writes them as sincere human beings capable of emotion. In Homer's Odyssey, the female characters are so central to the plot, whereas here, Nolan's version of the Odyssey, they're all forced into the background so the men can get their time in the spotlight. Calypso falling in love with Odysseus absolutely made no sense. It was just tacked on via dialogue. There was nothing in the story that showed them falling in love. Penelope was so horribly written, in my opinion. It's just such a miracle that Anne Hathaway is such a great actress that she managed to elevate those words that were on paper into something that's tangible and believable. She managed to give that character some dimensionality, but otherwise the female characters are not written with any nuance. They're all written to be like hurdles or objectives for the men, and to me that's such a very lazy writing trope that Christopher Nolan's fallen into time and time again. Now, from a technical standpoint, I can be honest, guys, this is Christopher Nolan's most bland film. It's the least impressive visually, in my opinion. It was bland, it was boring, it was ugly, it was utterly sauceless, and it features some of the worst camera operating in any Christopher Nolan film I've ever seen. If you've seen this movie in IMAX, you probably know what I'm talking about, but the focus pulling in this film is so atrocious. I have no idea what this focus puller was doing. He was fighting for his life. There were some shots that were so amateurish with the focus pulling that I almost couldn't believe I was watching like a $200-300 million movie by one of the most renowned filmmakers in the history of film. The camera work was so shaky, it was so bad. I think it's because they're using these IMAX cameras. They must be so hard to handle because these guys were struggling. Like, it was very, very clear, and visually it was just so inconsistent. Within the same scene, you'd have shots that have different color grading and like different settings, different camera settings, different noise levels, different ISOs. You could actually see it. So it's either that they did reshoots or they filmed it on different cameras, or like the different settings, they didn't communicate between the camera operators on the settings that they should use that day. Something was amiss, something was not clicking there. To me, the camera work was very, very bad, but the colors were just so bland and boring. Every island looked the exact same. There was nothing visually that stood out except maybe the Hades sequence, which had like a blue tone. None of the locations had like a distinct visual identity that would stand out or be iconic or memorable. And as monumental and as huge as the story of the Odyssey is, the scale and the scope here felt very, very small to me. I felt like it was like suffocatingly stuck in some sort of tunnel vision, and you never really get the sense that these vistas or landscapes are breathtakingly huge or massive. And I always found that Nolan's a bit guilty of like overstaging. Now I feel like here in The Odyssey, because he's dealing with things on such a bigger scale, it feels like his most clumsiest attempt at making things visual and staging things and blocking things in a way to manage all these crazy moving pieces. He's directed a lot of great set pieces before. I never thought he was a great action director per se, but set pieces, yes. I can't say that he's done anything here that impressed me too much. I do appreciate that Nolan seems to be toying with horror and the horror genre in some scenes here. Like the way he approached the Cyclops scene was very, very unique and very cool. He was toying with practical effects and horror filmmaking styles in a way that was very unique to him. As cool and unique and badass as that was, something like the Lystragonians or the pig transformation scenes, he's again toying with horror there in the way the trees moved or the way the faces were transforming. I couldn't help but laugh at how those scenes were particularly executed. They didn't strike me as interesting or unique or cool. You know, he's done some very, very unique stuff visually. It was very, very disappointing to see what he did with the pig transformation. Even though it was practical effects, I was never really sold on it, and the way the trees were moving in that Lystragonian scene, it did not work for me personally, but it was a cool concept. It could have been much better if the execution kind of landed a little bit better. That practicality came at the expense of entertainment, in my opinion. I really think Nolan's great at a lot of aspects of directing, not as much as screenwriting, but one aspect he's really terrible at is his action directing. I don't believe he's got that nailed down quite yet. His action is just so clumsy and boring and like weightless, in my opinion. It's like people swing swords or swing punches like they're like geriatrics, and then they're swinging in slow motion. Like nothing feels real. The choreography never feels like it's like modern or updated or tangible. None of the deaths have impact. None of the kills or the punches or the hits or the injuries have impact, in my opinion. He's so focused on the staging, like I mentioned before, that it comes at the expense of the flow of a scene. And you can see this as far back as like the Dark Knight movies. The Dark Knight Rises, for example, has Bane and Batman fighting in what should be a huge monumental fight, but every time Bane throws a punch or Batman throws a punch, it's so slow. These are supposed to be the two best ninjas from the League of Shadows, but they're not fighting like the two best ninjas I've ever seen. And in Odyssey is very similar. All these combat sequences, war sequences, battles with mythological creatures all come off so kind of clumsy and slow and clunky, and it all results into this one final scene with the suitors at Odysseus' mansion. That whole scene almost felt like a farce, like a parody scene from something like SNL or like the MCU, with Robert Pattinson's character kind of like screaming the names of the weapons as they're being dropped down in the hole in the wall. And the way Odysseus was shooting arrows at people just looked so funny. That whole action sequence is supposed to be like this huge emotional climax. I know some people in the theater were enjoying it, but for me, I couldn't take it seriously. Like, I was laughing my ass off at the execution. None of it felt real. None of the action felt like it was badass or unique or cool. It was just Christopher Nolan directing things to kind of get it done and get it out of the way. And that to me is like the most disappointing thing for a director of that caliber to do. It felt very comic book movie coded in that scene. In all the other scenes where there was sword combat or any type of combat, again, it just felt very, very slow. It didn't feel like people were trying to hurt each other or kill each other. It felt very charades. It felt very like community stage play, and I can't really vibe with that personally. If I'm being real, one of the biggest crimes of the film is the absolute butchering editing job here that's been done. Jennifer Lame seems to be having her ass handed to her in the editing room here. It just seems like she's trying her best to make sense of Nolan's overstaging, trying to incorporate every single shot that Nolan did instead of having confidence in letting shots linger. It was like a rapid fire, disgusting, like schizophrenic editing style that did not suit the type of film that The Odyssey is or is trying to be, in my opinion. It's very, very messy. Like I said, it's like it's not confident in any single one shot. It's trying so hard to do way too much. So many times, like, a regular scene would be cut up by this unnecessary edit, these unnecessary shots. I already said the film feels suffocating. This added to the suffocating nature of the film. We jump into things mid voiceover, mid media res as things are happening, and you're kind of getting whiplash, being jumped from one cut to the next. Nolan seems to be rushing every single moment, and Jennifer Lame is like lagging behind, trying to make sense of all of it and putting all of it on the plate at once. It becomes such a mess. It's too messy. It did not work for me. Some people might disagree, but I thought this was like the worst editing I've seen in a Christopher Nolan film ever. Yes, some of the casting is atrocious. We don't even need to talk about that. We can talk about the performances that worked and the ones that didn't. I thought Matt Damon was adequate. He was very solid here. I thought Anne Hathaway was solid. She did her best with very, very weak material. Tom Holland, I'm sorry, he just does not have what it takes to be on screen with these other great actors. Benny Safdie, like, no comment. He's just like the worst. I cannot stand him whatsoever. Robert Pattinson was really good. He's always managing to do something unique with his deliveries that I really like. Charlize Theron was very, very bad in my opinion. Zendaya was okay. Elliot Page was not good when he was alive, but when he was dead in Hades, he put on a very good performance. It kind of balanced out. Samantha Morton was very good, and John Leguizamo was very, very good. Surprisingly, I haven't seen him do much acting these days, but he really, really nailed the performance here. I think overall, The Odyssey was just so disappointing, and the biggest crime is Nolan's insistence on writing everything himself to this day. I feel like he was such a better filmmaker when he was writing scripts with his brother Jonathan, who is a much better writer and a proven writer. I feel like now Christopher Nolan just doubling down and tripling down on his shortcomings as a filmmaker with no one to check him, because he's the most successful filmmaker now. He's getting blank checks. He's surrounded by yes men. I mean, no one's going to tell him that his script might need a rewrite, or he needs to let a scene kind of like linger a little bit and like stop and smell the roses. As a filmmaker, it'd be nice if somebody would. I do believe that if somebody else was to write scripts for him, or if he collabed with somebody else, he'd make one of the greatest films of all time. But he seems so hell-bent on writing everything himself that it kind of creates these issues, in my opinion, with his stories. The score here was okay, nothing to write home about. There was not a melody or anything that really stood out to me. The sound design, personally, I mean, it was good. There was a lot of really cool sound moments, but the dialogue, as usual, is not very well mixed. It seems like there's some issue with Christopher Nolan's hearing. Either he's hypersensitive or hard of hearing. I haven't really figured it out, because it's been over a decade or so where the dialogue is not getting mixed right and is not quite sitting right in his mixes in his movies. And for it to be a problem for this long, it's kind of weird, in my opinion. And regardless of what it is, again, here there's some moments of dialogue where it's being whispered while the music is very loud. It's very, very hard to hear. It's not as bad as something like Tenet or Interstellar, but still a very noticeable problem. Overall, The Odyssey was just a huge disappointment to me. Like, it's not as bad as Tenet or The Dark Knight Rises, but it's fighting quite hard to be one of the worst films Christopher Nolan's made, and in my opinion, the worst script he's ever written. I know a lot of people like to treat Christopher Nolan as if he's some sort of god, especially on film Twitter and stuff like that. To me, he's a very flawed filmmaker. I'm really curious to know what you guys think. What did you guys think of The Odyssey, guys? Am I being too harsh on this film? Did you guys like it? Please let me know in the comments down below. Let's talk about it. I would love to know your opinion. In the meantime, that's my review of The Odyssey. A little bit of a longer one, but I wanted to get all my thoughts out. I do have another review coming for you guys very soon about The Invite. But in the meantime, please like, please subscribe, please drop some comments down below. Hit that notification bell as well. Please go and read the review and follow me on Letterboxd as well. My name's Nova, this is Film Express, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. See ya.